My father-in-law handed me the worst house in the family and still smiled like he was doing me a favor. They didn't even try to hide it. They actually laughed when I took those old keys in my hand, trying to figure out if this was serious, some sick joke, or just one more way to remind me exactly where I stood in that family. "It's all you deserve," my father-in-law said, smiling. The house, out near the edge of Villa Park, was the one they all called cursed, and apparently, that fit me just fine. My sister-in-law didn't let the moment pass either. "Wow, you really hit the jackpot. I'm jealous." I didn't react. I just stood there, noticing that look again, the way they all looked at me like they'd decided a long time ago who I was in that family, the one who accepts things, the one who handles things, the one who doesn't question anything. I tightened my fingers around the keys, cold, old, hanging from a dirty little keychain. The kind of thing nobody actually wants. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random family joke. They meant for me to take the worst part and be grateful for it. My name is Hannah. I'm 36. I'm an ER nurse. I have a 7-year-old son named Elvis, and I'm used to dealing with chaos without falling apart. But that wasn't chaos. That was deliberate. Daniel, my husband, stayed quiet beside me, like he always does when his family crosses a line he'd rather pretend not to see. And Elise, well, my sister-in-law has never had to pretend. She's always been completely sure she was a step or two above me, especially me. The house sat on a piece of land way too big for something that rundown. Dark wood, that stale, dusty smell, stacks of old newspapers like somebody had stopped time in there and never came back. I went up to the attic more out of habit than curiosity. I always look where nobody else bothers to look, and that's where I found the box. Rusty, heavy, left in the corner. At first I just thought, okay. It didn't look like much. But I got curious. I sat down on the floor, opened it carefully, and, honestly, no surprise, there weren't any jewels in there, just some yellowed papers. So I started reading, and the more I read, the clearer one thing became in my mind. This had not been a mistake. It was a choice. If you've ever been in a situation where you realized you were put there on purpose, not by accident, but because it was convenient for someone else, leave a like. Now get yourself a glass of water and sit down. Because what I found in that house, they were definitely not expecting it. The next morning, I drove out to Villa Park with Daniel in the passenger seat, and the house looked even worse in daylight. The porch leaned a little. The paint had been peeling for years, and the yard had that tired, neglected look people stop noticing when they've already decided something has no value. Daniel got out with me, but barely. He stayed near the car while I unlocked the front door, like getting too close to that place might somehow become his problem. "You really want to do this today?" he asked, hands in his pockets, already sounding inconvenienced. "It's a house," I said. "I'm at least going to see what they dumped on me." He nodded, but didn't move. That told me enough. Inside, the air was dry and stale. Dust sat on every surface. The curtains had gone yellow at the edges, and there were stacks of old newspapers tied with string like someone had meant to come back one day and never did. I walked through the room slowly, taking it in. Daniel stayed near the entryway, scrolling through his phone. That got under my skin more than I expected. Not because I needed help, just because, once again, something was being done to me right in front of him, and he had already decided distance was easier. "Your family really thought this was funny," I said, running my fingers across the dining room table and leaving a clean line through the dust. He glanced up. "They think the place is worthless." I looked at him. "That's not what I said." He didn't answer. He just slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked away. What bothered me most was that the house didn't match the story they'd all been so comfortable telling. The staircase creaked, but it was solid. The kitchen cabinets were ugly, but real wood. The windows were old, not broken, It wasn't some cursed wreck. It was a house people had ignored on purpose until neglect became the only thing anyone saw. And the land around it stayed in my head. Too much of it. Too quiet. Too valuable. By the time Daniel left to pick up Elvis from school, I was upstairs opening closets and checking drawers. Not because I expected anything dramatic, just because I've learned people hide things in places they've stopped respecting. At the end of the hallway, I spotted a folding ladder in the ceiling. I pulled it down, and warm, dusty attic air came down with it. I stood there looking up for a second, one hand on the ladder, already feeling that small shift in my chest. Nothing clear yet, just the sense that the house wasn't done with me. The attic wasn't chaotic. That was the first thing that felt off. Everything up there had been placed, not dumped. Old trunks lined one side, rugs rolled tight and stacked, labeled boxes faded with time but still turned outward like someone once planned to come back for them. It didn't match the story of a cursed house nobody wanted. It looked maintained, just not recently. I moved slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light from a small side window. Dust shifted under my steps, but nothing felt unstable. No rot, no collapse, just silence. And then I saw it. In the far corner, half hidden behind 2 hat boxes and a stack of old phone books, there was a metal box. Small, rectangular, heavy even before I touched it. I crouched down and pulled it closer. The metal was cold, rough under my fingers, the lock stiff but not broken. It wasn't decorative. It was meant to hold something that mattered. For a second, I just looked at it. Then I opened it. Nothing dramatic, no jewelry, no cash, no secret letter folded into velvet, just papers, old, yellowed, clipped together in uneven stacks. I almost closed it right there, but something made me stay. I sat down on the floor and pulled the first set of documents into my lap. The paper felt fragile, like it had been handled carefully for years and then forgotten. At first, none of it meant anything to me. Names, dates, descriptions, numbers. The kind of thing most people skip because it feels too boring to matter. I kept reading anyway. One page, then another, and somewhere in the middle of something that looked completely ordinary, I saw the family name. Not where it should have been. Not the way I expected. I went back and read it again, slower this time. Then the next page, and the one after that. The wording stayed the same, but the meaning didn't. I felt my whole body go still. Not panic, not shock. Just that quiet kind of stillness that comes when something shifts before your mind catches up. This wasn't random paperwork. This was deliberate. I adjusted the stack in my hands and leaned closer to the light, reading line by line now. There were references to land, not the house. The land, legal descriptions, boundaries, terms. And by then, I already knew I wasn't looking at something they forgot. I was looking at something they never wanted found. I kept reading until the light in the attic started to shift. The papers still looked dry and ordinary, but they didn't feel that way anymore. Everything kept pointing back to the same thing. Property lines, the original ground lease, the legal holder of the base deed. I read the language twice, then again slower, because every time it landed, it got heavier. The house had never been the point. It was the land. Then I found an old map folded into the stack. Survey lines, parcel markings, notes in faded ink. I flattened it carefully over my knee and followed the boundaries with my finger. And then I stopped. One of the parcels matched the stretch where Elise's house sat. I checked again, then another one, and another. By then, my mouth had gone dry. The nice houses, the remodeled ones, the properties everyone in that family treated like proof of status. They weren't just nearby. They were sitting on the same land tied to the papers in my lap. I stayed there for a minute, trying not to let my thoughts run ahead of what I could actually confirm. Because I know the difference between suspicion and fact, and this was getting very close to fact. Near the back, clipped to a newer-looking page, I finally saw the lease term clearly enough for it to hit all at once. 50 years. I went back to the signature date, then counted again. Then one more time, slower. The lease had expired. Not years ago, not in some distant future, 30 days ago. I felt that before I fully processed it. Not excitement, not relief. Just that cold, clear sensation of something clicking into place too neatly to be an accident. I looked around the attic after that. The old trunks, the stacked boxes, the careful way everything had been left. This wasn't random junk. Somebody had hidden the most important thing in the house inside the least impressive box they could find, and trusted greed to do the rest. And greed had. I put the papers back in order and held them tighter than I meant to. Then I heard the front door open downstairs. Daniel was back. For the first time that day, I wasn't confused. I was sure. Daniel came up to the attic slower than usual, like he already knew from my face this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. He stopped a few steps away, looked at the papers in my lap, then at the open metal box beside me. "What is all this?" he asked, quieter now. I handed him the top document. "At first I thought it was nothing," I said. "It's not." He skimmed a few lines, frowned, and flipped to the next page too fast. "What am I looking at?" "The land," I said. "Not just this house, the others too." That made him stop. He read again, slower this time, then took the map from me and looked between the survey lines and the window like the houses might move if he stared long enough. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "I know." I took the lease page back and tapped the date. "Read that part again." He did. Then again. His face changed, not into anger, into dread. "It expired?" 30 days ago. He sat down on an old trunk across from me without saying anything. The attic felt smaller after that. Dusty, warm, too quiet. "They have to know," he said finally. Maybe Harold knew. Maybe somebody knew once and trusted the family to ignore the one property they all laughed about. "Either they know," I said, "or they were so sure this house meant nothing that they never checked." Daniel looked back at the papers. "Hannah." That tone again. "Be careful. Don't push. Don't make this worse." As if I'd done anything except read what they left behind. I stood up, brushed the dust off my jeans, and picked up the box. "I'm not doing anything tonight," I said. "I'm just not pretending I didn't find it." He got up too, still holding the map like it might burn him. "We need to think." "I already am." And the truth was, I had never thought more clearly in my life. If you've ever watched people underestimate you so completely they end up handing you the thing that undoes them, subscribe. Because once Daniel read that lease, even he knew this wasn't going to stay quiet for much longer. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was overwhelmed. It was the opposite. My head was too clear. The papers stayed spread across the kitchen table long after Daniel went to bed. I read everything again, slower this time, checking details I had already understood, making sure I wasn't filling gaps with assumption. Dates, names, parcel descriptions. Every line pointed to the same thing. The land had never been sold, only leased. 50 years. That was it. And now it was over. Around 2 in the morning, I pulled up the county records on my phone. Not to prove anything new, just to see if reality matched what I was holding in my hands. It did. The properties were all there, registered, updated, maintained, built on land that wasn't theirs anymore. I leaned back in the chair and let that settle properly for the first time. Not rushed, not emotional, just accurate. By morning, Daniel was already tense. He barely touched his coffee, kept glancing at the papers like they might disappear if he didn't keep checking. "We need a lawyer," he said, low, controlled. "I know. And we don't say anything yet." I looked at him over the edge of my mug. I wasn't planning to. That seemed to calm him for about 5 seconds. Then his phone buzzed. He didn't even need to check the name. The way his shoulders tightened already told me. "Elise?" he said, like it explained everything. Of course it did. He answered, turned slightly away from me, but not enough. I could still hear her voice through the speaker. Sharp, fast, already irritated. "Have you talked to her?" He glanced at me. "We just got here yesterday." "Well, good, because I've had 2 people ask about that property this morning. If she's going to sell, we need to move fast before it gets worse." I watched his face while she spoke. Not concern, not hesitation. Management. Like this was already a situation they expected to control. "I'll talk to her," he said. He hung up before I said anything. Then he looked at me. "She thinks you're going to sell." I held his gaze for a second. Then I reached for the folder on the table and closed it calmly. "I'm not selling anything," I said. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was just the first clear decision I'd made out loud. And something in his expression shifted when I said it. Not disagreement. Recognition. Because at that point, even he knew. This wasn't their situation to manage anymore. I didn't rush into anything that day. That seemed to bother Daniel more than if I had. He kept moving around the kitchen like something was about to happen, and he just didn't know when. Checking his phone, sitting down, standing up again. Meanwhile, I packed Elvis's lunch, answered a message from work, and folded the papers back into the same order I found them. Not slow, not anxious, just deliberate. Around midday, the doorbell rang. Daniel froze before I even looked up. I already knew. When I opened the door, Elise was standing there, sunglasses still on, like she hadn't planned to stay long. She didn't greet me, just stepped inside like the place still belonged to her somehow. "I drove by earlier," she said, looking around without hiding the judgment. "It's worse than I remember." I closed the door behind her. "It's exactly how you left it," I said. She ignored that. "Daniel told me you're thinking about keeping it." I didn't say thinking. That made her pause. She turned to look at me properly then, like she was adjusting the version of me she had in her head. "Look," she said, softer now, like she was doing me a favor again. "This isn't really your kind of situation. It's a liability. Taxes alone, I'm not selling." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I just said it. She let out a short laugh, like I'd missed the point on purpose. "You don't understand what you're sitting on." I held her gaze. "I do." That was enough to shift something. Not panic yet, but irritation. Because she was used to people either arguing or folding, not holding. She took a step closer, lowered her voice. "Then you understand why it makes more sense to let me handle it." There it was. Not concern. Control. I could feel Daniel behind me, not stepping in, not stepping out. Just there. Waiting to see which way this went. I walked past Elise without answering and set the folder down on the table. Not opening it. Just placing it there. That got her attention more than anything I'd said. "What is that?" she asked. I looked at her. "Something you should have looked at a long time ago." For the first time since she walked in, she didn't have a response ready. And that silence? That was new. Elise didn't leave right away. That was the first sign she understood the weight of what she was holding. She stayed there, flipping through the pages again, slower now, like she was hoping the meaning would change if she read it differently. It didn't. "This has to be incomplete," she said, more to herself than to us. "It's not," I said. She ignored me. "There would be extensions, amendments, something updated." She looked up at Daniel. "There has to be." Daniel didn't answer, because by then he had already checked enough to know she was reaching. Elise set the papers down carefully, but her movements weren't controlled anymore. They were tight, precise in the wrong way. "You can't just assume this means what you think it means," she said, trying to pull the conversation back into something she could manage. "I'm not assuming," I said. That stopped her. Not the words, the tone. Because I wasn't pushing. I wasn't trying to convince her. I was just stating it. She let out a breath through her nose and straightened up, adjusting her jacket like she was putting something back into place. "Even if this is real," she said, slower now, "it doesn't change anything overnight." I didn't answer. She kept going. "There are processes, legal steps. You don't just walk in and, I know." That cut her off. Again, not louder, just enough. She looked at me for a second longer this time, trying to find the version of me she was used to dealing with. It wasn't there. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. That question wasn't casual. It was the first honest one she'd asked since she walked in. I closed the folder in front of me and rested my hand on top of it. "I'm not selling," I said. Her jaw tightened. "That's not what I asked." "I know." Silence stretched for a second. Then she picked up her bag. "This isn't over," she said, already turning toward the door. "No," I said. "It's not." She stopped briefly, like she wanted the last word. Then thought better of it, and left. The door closed harder than necessary. Daniel stayed where he was, looking at the empty space she left behind, then back at me. "They're not going to let this go," he said. I met his eyes. "They don't have to." Because at that point, it wasn't about letting go. It was about who actually had something to hold on to. They didn't wait long. The next morning, 2 cars were parked in front of the house before I finished my coffee. Elise got out first, but she didn't come alone. 2 men stepped out behind her in suits, both with the kind of expression people wear when they expect the room to go their way. Daniel looked at me across the kitchen. They brought lawyers. I picked up the folder and opened the door. Inside, one of them started talking almost immediately. Procedures, clarification, possible misunderstandings. I let him finish. Then Elise stepped in. "Whatever you think this is," she said, measured now, "it's not that simple." "I know," I said. That threw her off more than if I'd argued. The other lawyer asked, "Ms. Mercer, what exactly is your intention regarding the property?" I set the folder on the table, opened it, and slid the lease forward. "I'm not selling." Silence. He read, then read again, slower. That was the moment the room changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The first lawyer straightened and chose his words carefully. "If this document holds, control of the land reverts to the holder of the base deed." No one needed help understanding the rest. Elise looked at me like the answer might change if she stared long enough. "That's not possible." I closed the folder. "You have 24 hours, I said. One of the lawyers looked up. "For what?" I met his eyes. "To figure out how you're going to deal with houses sitting on land that no longer belongs to you." That was it. No speech, no raised voice, no performance. Just the truth, finally sitting in the right place. What stayed with me afterward wasn't their panic. It was how fast arrogance turns into confusion when people realize they were never as safe as they thought. Tell me in the comments, what do you think hits harder, being humiliated in public or watching the person who looked down on you realize too late that they were wrong? And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who'd feel every second of it. Some things don't need noise to shift everything. Sometimes all it takes is finally understanding what was always yours.